Welcome back to DuLades After Dark. I'm Orion.
And I'm Ducky, and tonight this is one of those cases where you start out thinking, okay, this is bad, and then it just keeps getting worse.
Yeah, this is not a one bad night situation. This is a pattern guy.
Which, honestly, those are the ones that creep me out the most.
Same. Tonight we're talking about Harvey Carignan, and specifically his crimes connected to Alaska. But fair warning, this man left damage everywhere he went.
He's one of those people where once you learn his name, you're like, why is that not more talked about?
Exactly. So let's start where these stories always start. Before the crimes, before the headlines. Who was this guy before Alaska? So, before we get anywhere near Alaska, we have to talk about who Harvey Carignan was, because this is not a case where the crimes feel disconnected from the person. His early life is basically a blueprint for escalation. He was born in 1928, and from everything we know, his childhood was violent, unstable, and emotionally barren. Abuse, neglect, constant upheaval. There's no consistent safety, no real structure, just chaos layered on top of itself. And again, not an excuse. But when you're looking at patterns like this, you can't ignore the groundwork. What stands out to me is how early the warning signs show up. He wasn't just a troubled kid. He was aggressive, impulsive, and already showing a complete disregard for other people's boundaries. That's not something that suddenly appears later in life. That's baked in early.
Yeah, and what really gets me is how fast the system basically shrugs and goes, well, good luck with that. Because by the time he's a teenager, he's already getting arrested. Theft, assault, just constant brushes with the law. And instead of any meaningful intervention, it's just a revolving door. He goes into juvenile detention, comes out, goes right back in. And every single time, the behavior escalates. That's the part that feels so loud in hindsight. No cooling off period. No learning from consequences, just worse. And then, when he hits adulthood, same thing. Prison time, release, new town, new identity, almost. It's like he keeps resetting the board and hoping no one notices the pattern forming underneath.
Exactly. And that reset is important because Carignan learned something every single time he was incarcerated. He learned how to behave just well enough to be released. He learned what people expected from someone who was quote unquote rehabilitated. He starts figuring out how to look normal, how to hold a job briefly, how to speak calmly, how to not immediately raise alarm bells. And that's terrifying because now you don't have someone who looks obviously dangerous, you have someone who blends in.
And while all of that's happening, the violence towards women is already there. This isn't theoretical. He had convictions for sexual assault before the murders. This wasn't hidden. It's just wasn't connected across jurisdiction. So instead of one big flashing warning sign, you got a bunch of small ones scattered around different states. And nobody's putting the puzzle together just yet.
Right. And what really chills me is how comfortable he becomes with starting over. New city, new people, new chances, which also means new victims. There's this sense that he knows he can outrun his past just by crossing state lines. Rude. And for a long time, he's right.
Yeah, and that's where emotional detachment really shows. Because if you can just pack up and leave after hurting someone, after destroying lives, that tells you a lot about how you view other people. They're not people to him, they're opportunities.
And by the time Alaska enters the story, this isn't a man experimenting with violence. This is a man who has tested it, refined it, and learned how to hide it just enough.
Which makes what comes next feels like a surprise, and more like an inevitability.
Exactly. Alaska wasn't the beginning. It was just another place where the pattern continued.
So, by the time we get to what actually leads to Kerrigan's murders, we're not talking about sudden break or some dramatic turning point. This isn't a he snapped story. This is a slow, deliberate progression, and honestly, that makes it worse because at this point, he already knows what he wants. He already knows how to get close to it.
Yeah. And this is where the intention becomes really clear. Carignan isn't acting impulsively anymore. He's planning. He's choosing methods that give him access without resistance and without suspicion. And that's where the want ads come in. At the time, newspaper classifieds were just normal, completely everyday. You didn't think twice about responding to one. It was the equivalent of today's Facebook Marketplace or Craigslist, but without the same cultural fear attached to it just yet.
Exactly. There wasn't a built-in assumption of danger. If someone posted an ad offering work, housing, or help with transportation, it didn't scream red flag. And Carrigan understood that. He understood trust as a tool.
And the women he targeted weren't random. That part matters. These were women who needed something, whether they needed money, stability, a place to stay, or a way forward. These were people who were already carrying some vulnerability.
Which is such a deliberate choice. He wasn't hunting in places where people would immediately notice something was wrong. He was inserting himself into situations where being alone together felt reasonable.
And once that access was granted, that's when the violence happened. Sexual assault, control, domination, and over time, murder. This is escalation in its clearest form. Each offense lowers the barrier for the next one.
And there's something especially chilling about how low effort it is. No stalking from the shadows, no elaborate setup, just conversation, a meeting, a ride.
It reframes how we think about danger, honestly, because this isn't a monster lurking in the dark. This is someone sitting across from you, speaking politely, and maybe even seeming helpful.
And every time he gets away with it, or even just avoid serious consequences, it reinforces the behavior. It tells him, this works.
Which is why geography becomes part of his strategy. He keeps moving, state to state, leaving behind fragments of crimes that never quite get stitched together fast enough.
So, when Alaska enters the picture, it's not because something new happened psychologically. It's because Alaska offered him something specific isolation.
Wide open spaces, fewer witnesses, a sense, whether it be real or perceived, that people could disappear without immediate answers.
And that belief, that's something we see again and again with offenders who operate in rural and remote areas.
It's this dangerous assumption that distance equals invisibility.
And for a while, Kerrigan believes he found the perfect environment to keep doing what he'd already been doing.
But what he doesn't account for is that patterns don't just appear just because the landscape changes.
They follow you.
And in Alaska, that pattern finally catches up to him. So, when Carignan arrives in Alaska, nothing about him outwardly suggests what's coming next. He's not frantic. He's not unstable in a way that draws attention. He's calm, purposeful. And that's what makes this part of the story so unsettling, because Alaska isn't where his violence starts. It's just where it finally becomes undeniable.
Yeah. And Alaska at that time had this reputation and still kind of does of being a place where you go to start over. New name, new job, new life. For someone like Kerrigan, that meant anonymity, space, distance from his past.
And he slips right into his familiar pattern. He places a want ad. He presents himself as someone offering work, stability, or help, nothing flashy and nothing alarming.
Which leads us to Liana Roberts. And I want to slow down here because this is where the story stops being abstract.
Liana was a young woman just trying to live her life. She responded to Carignan's ad because why wouldn't she? There was no reason at that point to believe she was walking into any danger.
And that's the part that makes my stomach drop every time. She didn't do anything wrong. She didn't ignore red flags. There weren't any obvious red flags.
Exactly. She trusted someone who had learned how to be trusted. Carignan sexually assaulted her and murdered her, and her body was later found in a remote area, discarded like she didn't matter, like she was trash.
And Alaska's landscape plays such a heavy role here. The sheer size, the isolation, the silence, it's easy to imagine how someone like Kerrigan might believe that this place would swallow what he'd done.
But what he didn't account for were the details he couldn't control. Witnesses saw them together. People remembered their interactions. Little moments that didn't seem important at first, but later became crucial.
And those moments are everything, because without them, this case would have gone cold fast.
It's haunting to think about how close that came to happening, how easily Liana could have been reduced to just another unexplained disappearance.
And instead, her case becomes a thread that finally starts pulling everything apart.
What stands out to me here is how confident Carignan seems up until this point. This wasn't sloppy and it wasn't rushed. This was him doing what he'd done before.
Which tells you how deeply entrenched this behavior was. He believed he knew the formula.
But Alaska didn't erase his past, it exposed it.
And once investigators started asking the right question, the scope of who he really is begins to come into focus.
Liana Roberts becomes more than just a victim of a single crime. She becomes the turning point.
A moment where the pattern finally stops being invisible. So, once Liana Roberts is reported missing and then found, the tone of the investigation shifts fast. This isn't treated as an accident. This isn't brushed off as someone getting lost in the wilderness. This is clearly a homicide.
And that clarity matters because Alaska is vast and cases can easily slip into ambiguity. But here, there are enough concrete details to keep pressure on the investigation. Witnesses had seen Liana with Carignan. People remembered the ad, remembered the meeting, and remembered the timeline.
And suddenly, Carrigan isn't just some guy passing through anymore. He's a person of interest.
Once police start pulling on that thread, everything else comes rushing in. His criminal history doesn't just suggest risk, it confirms a pattern. Sexual assault convictions, prior violent behavior, time served, releases, and moves.
And that's where things get heavy, because now investigators aren't just looking at what happened to Liana. They're realizing this man has likely done this before.
Exactly. And that realization changes how law enforcement approaches him. This isn't about one crime anymore, it's about containment.
As word spread, the media gets involved, and the story starts expanding beyond Alaska. Reporters begin connecting the dots that jurisdictions never fully connected before. Similar crimes, similar method, similar victim profiles.
And this is where Carignan's past finally catches up to him. The thing he relied on, distance, stops working.
And you can almost feel the walls closing. The anonymity he depended on dissolves.
What's important here is that this wasn't instant. It took persistence. It took people paying attention to the details that might have seemed small at the time.
And it took someone saying, that doesn't feel isolated.
Because so often that's where cases fail, when no one asks the bigger questions.
Once Kerrigan is arrested, the evidence is overwhelming, not just in Alaska, but in the broader picture of who he is.
And at this point, there's no narrative left for him to hide behind.
The helpful stranger mask is gone.
What's left is the reality of the harm he caused and the lives he destroyed.
And for the first time, the system actually holds.
Once Harvey Carignan is fully in custody, there's this moment where the story stops expanding outward and starts closing in on itself. Because at this point, there's nowhere left for him to go.
Yeah, the running ends here. The starting over ends here. No new town, no new name, no clean slate.
He's charged, tried, and convicted, and the sentence is life without the possibility of parole, which, given what we know, feels less like justice and more like necessity.
Exactly. This isn't about punishment in an emotional sense. It's about preventing further harm, about making sure the pattern cannot continue.
And it's worth saying this outcome isn't guaranteed in cases like this. It took witnesses, it took persistence, it took people refusing to let Liana Roberts be forgotten or dismissed.
Because that's the other danger in cases like this, when victims become footnotes instead of the focus.
Carignan eventually dies in prison. His story ends quietly, with no spectacle and no redemption arc.
Which honestly feels appropriate. He doesn't get a dramatic ending.
But the resolution doesn't belong to him.
It belongs to the victims, to Leona Roberts, and to people who made sure her name didn't disappear into the Alaskan wilderness.
This case reminds us that patterns matter, that listening, connecting the dots, and trusting instincts can make the difference between silence and accountability.
And it's a reminder that even when someone tries to erase themselves by moving on, the truth always has a way of following.
So while this story has an ending, the lessons don't stop here.
And that's what brings us to the part where we step back and talk about the case leaves behind. So tell me, Orion, what do you think about this case?
Um, I'm a little kind of blurry on this case because, like, we do see that the main crime that got Carignan arrested was one that he committed in Alaska. But at this point, we don't really have a lot of further detail into the other crimes he did in other states. And forgive my lack of noticing, but we didn't even mention this guy was in the military. At
Yes,
one
yes, he
point, this
was.
man was a member of the military.
Yes. And the thing is, especially, so I think it's one of those things where him painting himself as he may have been painting himself as a veteran, he may have been painting himself in all these different lights to kind of you know, solidify his trustworthiness. And I honestly think one of the things that led to his downfall was the one thing he thought was going to protect him. Like he moved to Alaska, but when you get out into Alaska, there's not a lot of big towns. You know, I've never personally been to Alaska, but from my buddies who do currently live in Alaska, they've said that it's one of those things where everyone kind of knows everybody, right? So if you're used to seeing the same woman here at this place at the same time, that might, and all of a sudden she's not there, that tends to raise some questions. And in those small communities, people tend to care for each other.
Oh, absolutely. Even in towns a little bit bigger than what you're describing, the people mostly all know each other and care about each other. There was a town I lived in growing up where we moved into the town when I was 9. And by the time I had finished the school year, and we're talking like this was a max of like 6 weeks to finish out the school year, most of the people in the district knew who we were, knew what we looked like, and were watching out for us. And like they saw us all over the place all summer long. And if they didn't see us out and about, our friends started like calling up our house and was like, "Hey, are you guys okay? You haven't been out."
Yeah,
So
exactly.
like
And I guess,
to be in an area like that, sorry to cut you off, to be in an area like that in Alaska where everybody knows everybody and everybody calls you friend, not to sound cliche, um, and try to commit a crime and still get away with it just because you think the open space is going to give you safety. I think he didn't really think that through.
yeah, and honestly, it's one of those things where from the outside looking in, oh, go to this place. There's not a lot of people, so there's not a lot of people to catch you. But it's all, and there's all that open space, so you can hide people anywhere. But it's also one of those things where I believe that is what inevitably ended to like led to his thankful catch and you know, arrest. But do you think maybe if you would have moved to a different place, let's say somewhere still like remote, but not as like isolated as Alaska, like for example, I don't fucking Idaho, do you think it would have led to the same outcome?
I'm not really sure. If it was another small town, because, like, obviously, as we know, most of Alaska, the places that are populated are these itty bitty towns that everybody knows everybody, right? And they expect to see you, doing XYZ on a regular basis. So if it was another tiny town like that, like the town that I used to live in, which is a little bit bigger, like I said, or the town that you grew up in, might notice something that was off. But I don't think that he would have been arrested nearly as quickly if it was any place that was even just half again the size of the area that he was in. He would have had more time to manipulate people into not saying anything or telling them that they're crazy, that she's probably just homesick or something like that.
Yeah, and this kind of case kind of resembles the same way, I fucking forget her name, but the Black Widow murders, the one we did for Alabama, where their strategy was just move, right? Just get out of where
Right.
you are. And back when this was taking place, you could do that. Do you believe that if this was happening modern day, like 2020 plus, right? do you believe that it would happen and work as well? Like I just boop, pack up, leave,
Nowhere near.
boom.
Nowhere near. Because nowadays, everybody is watching out for the guy who's not familiar, right? So if you move
Yes.
into a new town nowadays, because everybody is so on edge, our government and our politics, our news is all so divisive that everyone is so on edge. When somebody new comes into your area, you're gonna know. And you're going to be looking at them and wanting to know what's going on with them. Like, why did they move here? Are they good people to be here? Like, do they have any shitty past, etc., so on and so forth. You're going to be watching a new person when they come into your area and you find out about it. Whereas back then, people didn't care as much because everybody assumed the best in other people. Nowadays, you can't assume the best in other people because the ones that you tend to assume the best in almost always turn out to be the worst people. So I don't think anywhere near like, I would say even from like 2008 on, I don't think that people would, I mean, like, I would say 2001, but see, 2001, everybody started being afraid to go outside their homes to converse with other
Yeah.
people. So I would say more like the later early 2000s was when people started like opening back up to each other and stuff like that and like being in public and not fearing being in public as much. All the way up to like even like if 2010 even, you would say that's when people started to get more suspicious of your neighbor, for
Yeah.
lack of better
And
terminology.
do you think it's just people changing, or do you think it's been like the internet just made that stuff more public?
So I think it's a little bit of both. Excuse me. So what I think is that people in general have become more wary of other people. As awful things continue happening, people become more and more wary of other people, even people that you usually would normally trust or you wouldn't second guess, because they'll see someone similar to someone that they really trust, like committing a crime or being found with CP or, being accused of inappropriateness or being accused of XYZ, whatever it is that they're being accused of. And they see this person as similar to someone they know in mannerisms and personality. And they're like, maybe my person could be that type of person too. So people are far more suspicious of each other nowadays. And I feel like that is where the groundwork is laying. Where as far as the internet is concerned, I feel like the groundwork is laying in people who have suspicion of one another. And then it's amplified by the fact that someone who has a suspicion of another person or a beef with another person will post it on the internet to see the types of people that would agree with them that they are slighted and the types of people that would disagree with them that they are not slighted, such as simple as saying the Reddit subreddit, am I the asshole?
Okay, so it's one of those things where the internet kind of just aids in it, right? So it was going to happen anyway, but the internet just like basically brought everyone together.
Sped up the process, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. That makes sense. It's one of those cases where I think it's just it was inevitable from the start. Again, the whole time we're talking about it, it's just, kill, move, but eventually you're going to run out of places to go, right?
I have a question for you
It,
though.
yes.
So, as a person with military experience, do you think that
Hmm.
military experience also contributed to the types of things that he was doing? Especially, like you mentioned earlier, was saying, like, hey, he's former military, so people were more likely to trust him to begin with.
Yeah, so um I don't know. When we were looking into this, I couldn't find a lot on his military, like like his service, right? It just says that he was there, but there wasn't a lot to do. But whenever you're in the military, especially when you're in certain jobs, you kind of give off this presence of like people just kind of know, right? And then especially
Right.
back then, people just people kind of automatically give you a certain level of respect and trust when it comes to that. Not everyone, especially not nowadays, but to
Would you
to an
say you've
extent.
ever experienced that?
Yeah, there's definitely times like whenever I came home one day, there was like this VFW event that I was taking care of. And again, obviously it's just like people who served with more people who have served. So you have that level of respect from the older guys. But even like some civilians, whenever I was in Texas there for a little bit, like they will go out whenever they like see you or something like that. They will go out of their way to try to like show their appreciation, whether that's by like buying you a drink or buying you like helping pay for your meal or something like that. So for that, depending on where you're at, especially with Alaska being, I'm not saying it's, it's not really a political thing, but typically I've seen it more in red states. With Alaska being a red state, typically they do show a little bit more appreciation to their military. So, especially if he was playing the new guy in town, right? I'm playing the military, and especially with there's a base right there in Anchorage, Alaska, which is I believe is where this is taking place. Um, they kind of already has that respect for you, right? So if he's using that compounded with the whole, new guy in town, hey, I'm giving work to people who need it, right? People aren't going to raise that many red flags because they're like, oh, well, he's, you know, no one's gonna question the old veteran that just walked into town, right?
Right.
Until people start going missing, right? Then it's one of those things where it's like, okay, where's Liana, right? We haven't seen her all week, right? Last time we saw her was with the new guy in town.
Right. And
Now
then
we
so
have
automatically
problems.
throwing up red flags of saying
Yeah,
things like, and it took them a minute to notice that this was a red flag moment. But then once they realized, okay, so we haven't seen or heard from Liana in, X number of days, and she's not doing her normal routine and nobody can find her. And the last time she was seen was she was witnessed by multiple different people with the new guy in town who tries to put off this vibe of you can trust me, I'm a good person, et cetera, so on and so forth. But it's a little hinky that nothing ever happened to her before, but then this new guy comes into town and then not too long after she goes missing.
yeah, and especially like they were saying, people notice the ads. Everyone like again, this was pre-internet, so everyone's reading the paper, right? So they're like, okay,
Right.
this new guy just comes into town and he's offering work, right? Maybe multiple people had shown her the ad, right? So now it's like, okay, now people are assisting him in a way, like not intentionally, but they're like, hey, we know you're looking for work right now. This new guy just came into town. He's offering work. So it's not going to be an over applied,
Right. So
oversaturated thing.
like word of mouth.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So she goes and she's like, hey, I want to work for you. And no matter, I don't know exactly what the ad said, but then she goes missing. Okay, well, last thing we heard, she was going with this guy, right? We pointed her in this direction because we know she needed work. And then she went missing, right? So it kind of one of those things where it points to only one person, then they start going, okay, well, someone else was responding to a job ad that went missing in this state and this state and this state. And then they're like, okay, well, it's just one dude who's jumping around.
Right. Because they can then trace it back to, well, this was the same dude that posted these want ads in these several different towns inside these several different states. So this points to, obviously, this guy being the one that's doing it here as well.
Yeah. But it's also one of those things where like hindsight's 2020, right? So we're not gonna like obviously us looking back at it reading it, it's like, oh yeah, that looks so obvious. Like he's doing the same thing over and over again. How are people not putting these together? But we have the convenience of like looking backwards, right? Like something a little bit more recent is like you look at Epstein's Island, right? You're like, how the fuck do people not see this, right? Or you're looking at like that's really the most recent crime I can think of right now. But people are looking at it and it's like, how did we not notice, right?
I can give you another example. It's not the same, it's not a crime, but like, for instance, with Chester Bennington from Lincoln Park, he sang for 20 years about being depressed and wanting to die. How did people not
Yeah,
know that at some point he was going to try to off himself? Or even going further back, I don't know if you recently heard about the updates in the Kurt Cobain case,
yeah,
where there was a private investigator working on it saying, hey, this was not a suicide, this was a murder. He had too much
that
heroin in
damn it,
his system
Courtney
and his
Love.
body had already started going necrotic. But like, that's the type of thing that we see here is like, how did you not see it? But hindsight being 2020, we're noticing it. We're seeing, hey,
Yeah, I'm
all of this stuff was there, just nobody put all the pieces of the puzzle together to see it.
Yeah, and with all of this though, it's kind of interesting when you're looking at it, especially with like the like with the Epstein files just coming out. There are people who are looking at these and noticing all the conspiracy theories are coming true, Except for flat
Right.
earthers. They have to sit there and watch while everyone else is correct.
Yeah,
So
poor guys.
yeah, so they're on their own over there.
That's just wild. Just absolutely wild. Um, drawing drawing close to our end here. Cases like these, they always leave me sitting with a lot of quiet questions. Not about him, but about like the spaces in between. The moments where something could have gone differently, the systems that almost failed. Like how we discussed, nowadays you wouldn't be able to get off with something like that.
Yeah, and it's unsettling because none of this requires any like anything really extraordinary, right? There's no elaborate setup, no dramatic chaos, and just it's really just he's taking advantage of the everyday trust of people.
And that is the hardest part to reconcile because we don't want to live in a world where every interaction feels like it's dangerous, but we do. Cases like this remind us why listening to your instincts matters.
Yeah, and it also reminds us of why like the patterns matter more than isolated incidents. Because one crime, it's gonna get dismissed, right? But two, you start getting at like the minimized, but it's the pattern, right? It's your pattern building.
Absolutely. Harvey Carignan doesn't get the last word here.
Yeah, Liana Roberts does. And so do the others whose lives were cut short because the system finally connected all the dots.
Remembering them is a part of the accountability for this situation, saying their names and holding space for the reality of what they went through.
Because true crime isn't about the fascination, it's about spreading the awareness.
And it's also about making sure silence never becomes the final chapter. And some people may not like to hear this, but there was one person who just passed away very recently who always said it's when we stop talking that violence starts happening. And I'm going to just leave that at that and not say who it is because I'm sure anyone listening will know. You've been listening to DuLades After Dark, where the stories are dark, but the truth is thrust into the light.
Definitely. So, all of your questions, comments, concerns, bitches, moans, and gripes, please leave us a comment and reach out to us through email address provided in the description of every episode.
That's right. We will get you a response as soon as we can after we see your contributions. We really love to hear from you. And I'll ask again tonight, please let us know how you felt about the pacing, level of detail, and conversational style of this episode.
Yes, you're helping us a lot. It makes us this a better experience for you as the listener, and we really do appreciate it.
So for now, I'm Orion,
And I'm Ducky.
and this has been
DuLades After Dark. Catch you next time.